And as Rebecca said, we had some kind of comments about anxiety, and I sort of thought, right, well, this, would be a handy talk to have, especially uh, considering the kind of upcoming sort of national lockdown and various sort of other things in dealing with the current COVID situation. So my main aim today, I suppose, is to help us to reframe anxiety where possible, and I guess sort of to help us think a bit differently about anxiety and why we might have it. Um, so um, I suppose interestingly, the kind of root of the word anxiety comes from to choke, a sort of choking feeling. And that's maybe for some people a kind of experience that they have when they're feeling anxious. So we use the word anxiety, I guess, to mean many different things, and there's different presentations of it. There's the kind of like everyday experience of anxiety, but there might also be, I guess, the more kind of diagnostic presentations. So we have, for example, general anxiety disorder, where you have many fears or worry that might sort of move between different kind of presentations and different situations. We have, I guess, social anxiety or social phobia, where we might be scared of social situations, of other people, particularly sort of fear around judgment, kind of speaking, public speaking, that kind of thing. We might also have a health anxiety, health disease, the body. Panic attacks, where we might suddenly have a sudden onset of panic, and it can feel like a heart attack, although it isn't a heart attack, and of course it's a different presentation, but it can feel very scary and overwhelming as it's happening. We might have, if you've heard of it, phobias, where we're scared of a specific thing or object. So arachnophobia, everyone's heard of that one, where you're sort of scared of spiders. You can almost put a sort of Latin or Greek word in front of the word phobia and then give it that phobia status. OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, where we might have frightening thoughts, which might, for some people, result in rituals or routines, depends. OCD has quite a wide constellation of presentations, but I guess this is what some people are familiar with for OCD. Agoraphobia, I guess fear of the marketplace or open spaces, for example, leaving the house, going out there into the world. And all of these have, I suppose, the key thing, which is the fear of risk, and a perceived sort of appraisal, I suppose, of threat or danger at their core. And of course, I guess what we need to do as human beings is kind of balance fears that we might have with living our lives and making sure that we have a rich life. Obviously, we'll have to make some adaptations at the moment with COVID, with social distancing and all these kind of things. But I guess in non-COVID times, some of the key processes in terms of dealing with anxiety is to do the things that we fear, because often the feeling of fear stops us from living fully and meaningfully. So we have, I guess, different words, right? And we might use them interchangeably. So anxiety predominantly, I guess, how I would use it is it can be chronic or acute, but it's a longer term presentation, usually without a stressor that's present. Worry is what we do when we feel anxious, stressed or panic. It's a mental activity. It's kind of like rumination. It's a very natural process. So if you can't sleep, for example, and your mind is very busy and alert and processing lots of things, that would be like worrying. Worry can happen to us at any time during the day or night, but we're most used to worrying, and I suppose we're most observing of worrying just when we go to sleep for some people, because that's one of the few times we're kind of just with our mind. Usually we're very busy during the day, we're very distracted, lots of things to focus on, and actually just that time before sleep is the only time when you're with yourself and you're quiet and noticing your thoughts. So that's maybe where we notice worry a bit more. Stress is something that is quite acute, usually shorter term, although it can build up. Of course, these aren't these are flexible definitions, I would say. Usually involves a stressor or an agitator, and when that stressor is gone, then the stress reduces. So some people might have exam stress. That's linked to exams. When the exams have gone, the stress then decreases. Or panic, as I've mentioned before, which is usually very acute, very short term, on average 10 to 30 or 40, 50 minutes. panic requires so many resources from the body that it can't be maintained for a long period. But you can have recurring panic attacks, of course, but they sort of have these sort of periods of time. So we sort of use these words interchangeably, but they do, I guess, technically mean kind of different things. And I suppose one thing I wanted to flag up, and I hope you kind of take this and it resonates with you, is having anxious thoughts, feelings, and physical reactions is different to having a diagnosed anxiety condition, because as humans, we are meant to have reasonable levels of anxiety in our day-to-day. Obviously, anxiety mustn't stop us from doing the things we need to do. But I guess what I'm sort of trying to separate is diagnosed conditions from kind of everyday anxiety experiences. Yeah, I've got a couple of these. So it's a card that's been sent from your mind to you with love. Good luck with your really important presentation goes blank. And that's kind of what's kind of happening for me right at this very moment. So without sounding too hippie-like, I guess we have two primal forces as humans that drive us. Well, there are many forces, but I'm going to be overly reductionist, simplistic, and provide something that's probably neither valid nor reliable. But there's two primal forces, I'd say. We've got love, moving towards something we like, we want more of, something we find appetitive. And we have fear, moving away from something we don't want more of, something we're scared of. And in a sense, fear is a very powerful motivator, as is love and connection, when we move towards something and when we move away from something. And I guess fear can also really determine our behavior, not just moving away, but also avoiding or having safety routines. So fear is powerful, as is love, and obviously other guiding feelings too. We have basic emotions, so obviously our language to describe our feeling world is super complicated and nuanced. But I guess Dr. Paul Ekman traditionally said there were kind of key feeling states that we can recognize across the globe. So we've got angry, happy, surprised, afraid, disgusted, and sad. And interestingly, I suppose a more recent study, although not that recent now, found that there might be kind of four more primal states that we can recognize, which is angry, disgusted, happy, sad, and then obviously the one we're interested in today is afraid / surprised, and we can recognize facial expressions from that. And that then has a kind of impact on how we perceive things. But fear, I suppose what I want to say with this slide is something that we're very akin to recognizing within ourselves and within other people, because it is a major kind of driver. Here's another one of those cards, having fun at the party. Remember, whenever there's an awkward silence, the other person is definitely thinking about how boring you are. So this is another thought I have. These cards are kind of curious, because obviously silences are only awkward because we suddenly are aware of our own thoughts, and we then start mind reading and we think we have thoughts about the other person, and then we sort of worry what the other person is thinking. So silences are a perfectly healthy and natural thing to have in conversation. They're only awkward because we label them in that way, because we're suddenly aware of our own thoughts and feelings. So what is anxiety, I guess? I've made a really poor slide here. I'm not going to get any job soon with Pixar, I don't think, but I guess in situations, our resources are maybe overwhelmed with demands, and it's usually things or situations we can't influence, right? So it's kind of things that we can't have, I guess, control over. It's usually new things or situations. So particularly with lockdown, what's making it tricky is it's familiar to us, but it's also, an uncertain situation and we can't control it. It's unpredictable things or situations. So what you're seeing is the key link is control. Humans generally like control. Our mind is the problem-solving machine, and it struggles when we can't influence a situation or a thing, or when something is unpredictable. And if it's new, it can be all of these. We react to things externally, so things beyond our skin or kind of out there, but we can also respond to things within us, inside us. So we might respond to our own thoughts, physiology, or our feelings, and this can, in a sense, trigger our own anxious experiences. So not only are we reacting to things outside in the world, but we might also be reacting to our own thoughts and feelings, and physiology as well. And the central nervous system is so sensitive as a kind of barometer of change that it can even be triggered, I guess, with a thought. And a thought can trick the brain into thinking this is happening right now, even though it's happening in the future or it's happened in the past. In a sense, the central nervous system has no concept of time. So painful memories can make you feel as if it's happening again, and can make you have physiological responses. Things in the future, which you know are years away, months away, days away, can suddenly feel as if they're happening right now. And that's kind of the trick that anxiety can play, because it doesn't have a concept necessarily of time. As I just wanted to say with this slide, I guess it's biological, right? It's biochemical, it's psychological, and it's a response to, as we said, stresses and things around us when those stresses demand more than our resources. And hopefully you've all heard of the 4 Fs. So you've got fight, where you attack, you sort of move forward, driven by anger. You've got flight, which is driven by fear, you run away, you kind of avoid fighting because it might come at too much of a cost. It's an automatic process. We have my favorite, which is the one I do all the time, which is to freeze. I pretend to be a bush or a tree and play dead and hope that the threat sort of goes past me. And sometimes we have fawn, a bit like Bambi, where you kind of offer the threat treats or rewards. So we've got the sort of the 3 or 4 Fs, but they're innate. And for some people, this is driven by their personality and their upbringing. So for example, some people are more kin to fighting, some people are more kin to running away, and some people freezing. What we see with kind of, let's say, paramedics or firefighters or police is their training pushes them to go towards threat or danger. Our instinct is to move away from threat and danger to keep us safe, but certain people's training moves them towards that danger. But I suppose what is important is that it's innate and it's very evolutionarily vital, because in a sense it's highly protective. It keeps us safe. The brain is looking for threat. And as we saw with imposter syndrome, threat is a version of this, because threat could be that that person has more resources than you have and you need to have more. And so it becomes kind of, produces scary thoughts or feelings. So anxiety or fear is highly protective, because it's there to make sure that you're not in danger. So a really good book is Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. You can see there's a handy kind of link there, and the quote, "It's not the stress that kills us, it's our reaction to it." And I guess what we're going to find out today is it's not just the stress that's problematic, but I suppose it's all the solutions which are both successful and unsuccessful in controlling or reducing anxiety. That is something to think about. Anxiety might be tricky because we have the outer reality. So it's the actual situation that we're dealing with. We've got our interpretation of the situation. How bad is this? This is terrible. It won't end. It's unfair. Some of this will be familiar rather to us in terms of COVID and the lockdowns and all that kind of stuff. And we also have our sort of interpretation, I guess, of our ability to cope with the situation as we experience it. So it's not just the outer reality, our interpretation of the situation, but our ability to cope with it. It's too much, I won't make it, I'm too drained, all that kind of stuff. So we're dealing with lots of levels of interpretation, and these can all happen super duper quickly, which makes anxiety kind of automatic, but also at times quite overwhelming. So without going into the sciencey bit too much, I just wanted to show a kind of another poor slide. I do apologize, hashtag sorry, not sorry, but what you can see here is the peripheral nervous system. And because it regulates the autonomic nervous system, the reason I'm showing this to you is not to bumbles you with sort of poor science, but actually it's interesting because it shows us what is controlled in the body automatically. And these are all the things that we might feel in the fight or flight. So heart rate, so you might get palpitations, digestion is controlled, breathing, pupillary response in your eyes, so you can, whatever, see the threat, urination, sexual arousal, and these are kind of unconsciously and automatically controlled, which means that often with anxiety, it's not just the initial response that's scary, but it's the body doing its own thing that makes it scary, because it's automatic, right? But it's a natural thing for us to have. And there's a kind of balance between, I guess, two systems. One is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is kind of like rest and digest, homeostasis or balance. It's nice balance. Relaxation response is good. And then unhelpfully, I'd say, called the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight. And that's, in a sense, the more dominant of the two systems, because your body, through its evolutionary development, well, it's better to err on the side of caution, right? But there are things you can do to help the parasympathetic nervous system, aka Yoda, to regain some balance. But what we have to, I suppose, acknowledge to some degree is that the sympathetic nervous system is dominant, but also highly attuned to situations. But they can balance out with some practice and some suggestions, which I'll show you in a bit. So let's just show you how easily it's elicited. So hopefully you trust me and you feel safe and comfortable here. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to go down the list. I'm going to shout out someone's name, and then I'd like you to put your camera on, to unmute, be astute, unmute and contribute, and then sing a song. Okay, and it can be any song you like. I do like Lady Gaga, but that is just, up to you really. It can be anything really. So I'm just going to have a little look down the list, and then when I say your name, I want you to just turn your camera on. All right, and if you've got your camera on already, just make sure it's off. I see people quickly turning off. All right, so get ready. I'm going to say your name right now. I haven't said anyone's name. So that was maybe a bit mean of me, but who would feel comfortable saying what kind of symptoms, what happened in this exercise?
I started trying to think of like a song that could come to mind that wouldn't be too embarrassing to sing.
Yeah. Yeah, so your mind was like, quick, let's get out the Rolodex of songs. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I was rehearsing my vocals.
Good. You're warming up. That's great. That's great. Yeah, you must. Me, absolutely. Yeah. So you were preparing. Yeah. Great. Other people, how was that?
My chest went really tight, just feeling the physical heart and stuff
beating. Yeah.
At the chance of being called out.
Yeah, absolutely. So already that fight or flight was just very easily started, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that tightness, you could feel it in your chest and breathing, yeah, and heart beating faster. Yeah, absolutely. Amazingly how quickly it can happen, right? Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Other responses to this horrendously mean exercise that I inflicted on all of you, and I deeply apologize.
And we're getting people. Oh, sorry, Rebecca, you go.
No, you go, Hannah. Was that Hannah? No, Maddie, you go.
Oh, and I was just going to say, I think a lot of people writing in the comments as well. I was just going to say to Tim, because I didn't know if you saw people were just saying brain went black, hovering over the leave button, palms sweaty, repeatedly wishing you wouldn't call me, knees weak, all those ones.
Thanks for letting me know, because I couldn't actually figure out how to get into the chat. So I did. Okay, that's great. Yeah, absolutely. Knees weak. Yeah, that is all palms sweaty. Absolutely right. And it's your body's preparing for something. Yes. There's an Eminem reference. I didn't want to say in case I sounded outdated. So absolutely, it might be your mum's spaghetti, but we don't know. Great. So any other thoughts? Did anyone notice any kind of thoughts around thinking, or did your mind go blank, or did anyone want to say pick me?
I actually started laughing because I was quite nervous, but also I felt my heart massively racing, and I was just trying to slow it down, but I could really hear it and feel it. And I felt like my hearing was going funny, like a bit like that feeling that you get if you think you might faint. So it was quite a physical reaction for me.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that laughter is an absolutely natural reaction. It can be linked to, you know, kind of that fear response. Absolutely. And yeah, your hearing is also preparing to listen for sounds of threat. So one of the things that's happening in fight or flight is you're trying to listen to where the threat is in terms of closeness, because you know, in a sense, is the threat close or far away? So yeah, absolutely. Great, thanks everyone. Thanks for sharing as well. I didn't make anyone sing, so that was okay. But what you can see is the threat response is very quickly elicited within us, which shows us that it's actually very natural. It's meant to be there. It's just the right response at the wrong time most of the time. And also it just shows you how your body and your mind is primed for it. And the simplest thing, as an example, is I watched a scary film during Halloween, and I sort of regret watching that because it made me, I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. But even just the camera angles, the music, the lighting prepares you for threat, which you know is kind of coming because it's all these cues. So scary films are very good at eliciting this response in our bodies. Our bodies are naturally tuned to it. So let's just quickly go through the symptoms and the reason you're feeling it and what it might feel like. So the brain is processing and categorizing a lot of data at this time. Now, it might sound a bit weird, but it's categorizing data by shape, particularly, and by color. So for example, if there's something that moves in front of you and it's sort of long, thin and green, it might be a snake, right? But the brain is processing actually and categorizing data really quickly. But what you then feel is maybe unreal or detached, racing thoughts or tunnel vision. And that's because the brain is sorting key bits of data really quickly. It's also trying to figure out smell and sight and sound as well, because it's trying to figure out how far and how close is the threat. Faster breathing, so someone mentioned their chest tightening, right? But you might feel dizzy or lightheaded because you're taking in more oxygen to feed the muscles, to feed the brain so that you can fight, run away, or freeze, my favorite, and pretend to be in the background. Your pupils dilate, all right, and that's so you can sort of see the threat on the savannah. So you're sort of just going to see it in the horizon, but you might get blurring of vision or headaches or sensitivity to light. So different people react very differently, but these are some of the symptoms. There's narrowing of blood vessels in the mouth, right? Because in a sense, eating is non-essential when you're running away from a threat. You don't see a zebra chewing on some grass as it's running, it's literally going out there. So blood vessels are being redirected, but that means that you might have drying feeling or choking sensation or retching. So the body's taking over at this moment in time. People might breathe really fast and shallow, again, sort of a choking feeling or pressure on the chest. So some people feel anxiety in the chest, which is a very natural space to feel it. Sweating, so you might feel really hot. That's to cool you down, right? We sweat to cool down as all these systems kick in overdrive, but it's trying to cool us down. I did find a theory, which was again fake news, I think, but we sweat not just to cool down, but to be slippery so we can escape through rocks. But I think that was just wishful thinking, really. Nerve endings tingle, all right, to make us more receptive to danger and to threat. But then we also get goosebumps, right? And sort of changes in temperature as well. Stomach might shut down, we might vomit, so if we feel really anxious, and that results in kind of nausea, butterflies and churning. So the stomach is shut down because digestion is just not essential. And this is a massive system, right? Digestion to shut down. So that's why it's kind of, you might get these butterflies because it's being instructed to close down for business momentarily. Your heartbeat might be faster, all right? Temptations are quite natural to, in a sense, pump the blood around the kind of around your body. And then you've got sort of a cortisol, which increases adrenaline and glucose and oxygen, of course. But you might get aches and pains, tensing, fidgeting in your body as well. Blood is interestingly diverted to large muscles. That's one of the key things to think about. So that's in your arms and legs to get you out of there or to fight, but you might get tingling or jelly muscles or trembling or numbness. So quite interesting responses. And for some people, the inner sphincter relaxes, but the outer sphincter maintains control. And what you get is this urge to kind of urinate and defecate for some people, to go to the toilet even when you've just been. So in really nervous situations, we feel like we have to go to the toilet a lot more. And that's because the body's received an instruction to empty and lighten so that it's more likely to survive, right? If you've got an empty bladder, it's lighter, so it's more sort of nimble as it's trying to survive. So it's just these automatic processes, really, and this is the reason for some of them. You might have seen this before in my slide from imposter syndrome, but I guess what we're trying to figure out is anxiety is sort of, I guess, processed primarily by the amygdala in the primitive brain, right? So we've got distrust, survival, wanting to win at all costs, but it's trying to be mediated by the executive brain, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, where we have problem solving, focusing on goals, socializing, and calming routines. So the threat system, as we've said today, is very automatic, very easily elicited, better safe than sorry, lots of adrenaline, cortisol, anxiety, anger, disgust, amygdala driven. What we also have is drive, again, as I would say, is highly developed in Oxford students, to motivate us towards resources, whether that's grades or sort of research, that kind of thing. But the most crucial thing that we're thinking about today is the soothing system. And the system's purpose is to manage distress and to promote bonding. And that is in the prefrontal cortex, can release opiates and oxytocin. The higher the level of oxytocin, the better. And you can feel safe and protected. And there's things that you can do to help the soothing brain. But it takes a while for the soothing brain to calm down the primitive part of our brain, because obviously fear is kind of natural, but it's the strongest survival mechanism. We need anxiety and we need stress. So hopefully you're hearing this from a message today, because if you don't have enough stress, you're asleep. So obviously that it's a balance. You don't want to have too much because then you have burnout, but just the right amount can help you to perform well. So in this Yerkes-Dodson curve, you can kind of see performance over stress levels at the bottom and the performance at the sort of side. But you can see that certain amounts of stress are actually quite important. But it's like anything, it's kind of within balance. Now, one of the key things to think about with anxiety is that a lot of it is caused by the brain. Obviously, it's creating all the biochemical feedback, but it's also our thinking of anxiety that causes problems for us. So the brain isn't always our friend. And I think this quote from Stephen Hayes is quite interesting. The single most remarkable fact about human existence is how hard it is for humans to be happy. And I guess what you can see in this image here is it's kind of eat, survive, reproduce. What's it all about? Still probably eating, surviving, reproducing. But we've also got this added sort of consciousness of thinking about the past, thinking about the future, that can drive that anxiety too. And what we can see in this are two kinds of processes. So I just wanted to flag up two kinds of processes today. One is natural pain or natural distress or natural discomfort. And that will happen throughout our lifetime. It comes and goes. Distress, we have to have a rich, full life, but we can't have it without too much pain, because life is sometimes a bit painful and stressful. And we often want to numb the sort of the bad bits, but keep the good bits, right? But I suppose where I'm coming from, and I suppose others would disagree, maybe, so it's just my view, is that we need to have reasonable levels, of anxiety and stress to have a rich life, because sometimes we need to do things that scare us a bit, within reason, of course. It's all about balance. We have secondary pain, and that is where we kind of worry. So we don't just feel anxiety, but then we worry about the anxiety. So an example is where we break our arm. So primary pain is it hurts, right? Secondary pain is I'm going to worry about my broken arm because then I can't drive, I won't be able to earn money, will I lose my job? So what we can see is humans have this kind of double whammy. We have the primary situation and the secondary too. And the trick is to be able to try to reduce or soften the worrying tendency, because then what we have is being stressed about being stressed, or getting anxious about being anxious, right? It's like a meta, and you can slow the secondary pain down with some techniques that I'll give you. So another card, right, we're nearly there. So we're about to go to the breakout rooms. Happy bedtime. Here's a reminder of every embarrassing thing you've ever done in your entire life. Yes, thank you, brain, for giving me this to replay in this moment in time. So the key thing, what I would say with this card, is it highlights that the brain likes to replay things. It's a bit like the world's worst DVD player, because it's a video you often don't choose, and it plays it in the most inopportune moments. But that replaying is evolutionarily important, because it's trying to figure out how can we stop this happening in the future. It's trying to go through things. So don't buy into the replaying unless it's helpful for you, and just notice that replaying tendency. Try not to get caught up in it. All right, try to press pause, notice, and refocus on what matters, because replaying the event, unless you learn from it, isn't always helpful for you. So Maya Angelou always said it better. The excitement is not just to survive, she once said, but to thrive, and to thrive with some passion, some compassion, some humor, and some style. There you go. We couldn't say it better than Maya Angelou. So my first key tip, I guess, is the serenity prayer. So here we can see the secularized version of it. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that's the key thing with anxiety. I mean, it's hard to speak about it generally, because obviously there's lots of versions of it, from the kind of natural anxieties to the kind of more diagnosed conditions. But the key thing is to be able to figure out what can you change and control and what can't you. So in a sense, life has two sides of the same coin, I guess. One is anxious thoughts, feelings, and physical experiences, like the singing exercise. But then there's also the balance, which is what things that matter to you, your values, your goals, your achievements, and being you is so important. And it's kind of that flip side. So in a sense, we need to think about, not about getting rid of anxiety, because that's, well, tricky, I'd say, but it's about how do we stop anxiety, and if we can't stop it, how do we live with it to some degree within reason, but how does it stop us doing the things that truly matter? So what have I learned? So very briefly, we'll go this and then we'll finish. We'll go to the breakout rooms rather than I will finish, in fact, is the thought, once I get rid of this anxiety, my life can begin. And that's, I just be careful of that thought. Your life is now with anxiety and everything else. So please don't wait for the perfect moment to come. Your life is happening with it. So, you know, just be aware of not putting things on pause. The other thing I've realized is that the students that I've worked with, and myself, because I feel I have anxiety too at times, is that we're more than our thoughts, and we're much more than what our mind tells us. So I say to myself, if I'm feeling scared or nervous or anxious, I notice I'm having the thought that ... Like today, I'm making no sense, and this is a really boring talk. I notice I'm having the feelings of complete fear. And just to realize it's just neurons firing. So saying, I notice I'm having the thought, that just helps to separate the thought from you, because your mind is creating these thoughts, but they don't have to define you or who you are or what you do. And that's the same for the feelings sentence. And the just neurons firing is helping you think it's just a natural process. Do I trust my mind or my experience with all my senses? So your mind tells you lots of things. Some of them may be true, some of them may not be true. We know that thoughts aren't necessarily fact. So believing only the mind means buying into some thinking biases. And my mind doesn't have to define what I do or who I want to be. So the mind is overly selective. It's very biased towards risky thoughts, risky feelings, because fear is dominant. So it will ignore the positive stuff, the good stuff that will slide on by, like Teflon. It's the Velcro of negative thoughts that stick, because evolutionary, they are the most risky and the most delicious, and the ones that most require the most thinking. Does this thought or belief have my best interest at heart? Is a good question to ask yourself before you follow it and buy into it. And to give yourself worry time. So I allocate myself 15, 20 minutes a day, or how much time you want, but it's a fixed period of time. I put a little timer on, and if I'm working, I write the worries on a sheet of paper and I say I'm going to get back to that later. And then that helps me to create some space, but also it stops me kind of ruminating or following the thoughts, and then I can get to problem solving in that 15, 20 minutes, because worrying or rumination is quite easy to get caught up in. Nearly there, peeps. It's not about stopping anxiety, but changing my relationship with it. So I've had to, I guess, accept natural aspects of my physiological reaction, but it isn't about getting rid of that for me. It's about changing my relationship with it. If something is worth it, then I might feel anxious because I care about it, and that's how I see it. This will pass. So anxious feelings come and go, not as quick as I want, but they do. And can I make some room for this anxious experience, accept it, because fighting it doesn't work. So I've tried to work really hard on acceptance and making some room for anxious feelings and thoughts, because in a sense, they come and go. And if I fight it, then that makes it worse. I like to reframe, I have anxiety, or I'm an anxious person, to sometimes I feel anxious in certain situations. It makes it less global, right? So I have anxiety, I guess kind of labels it, right? But sometimes I feel anxious in certain situations might be a helpful reframe for some people. And good old mindfulness. I know I beat the drum about it all the time, and I do sort of apologize for that, but mindfulness is so crucial to helping us, in a sense, not get caught up in anxious feelings or thoughts. It helps me to not follow the thoughts, believe them as true, and just to let the thoughts and feelings come and go. And mindfulness is quite crucial because it helps you to develop the position of observer rather than follower, right? You are observing rather than following your thoughts, because fear will make the thoughts very dominant, right? It will try to hijack your experience. Fear tries to hijack your experience. So mindfulness is pretty good to help develop that observer role. As we finish, just wanted to say that mental health is a spectrum, a continuum, and I'm always curious why certain feelings are considered better than others, right? Poor old anxiety's got a bad deal. It just wants to live in your body and protect you. So try not to focus too much on having anxiety or getting rid of it, because then you get stuck in this kind of binary thing. Life is all about color, within reason, of course. It's all about within reason. But we get so fixated on trying to be anxiety-free and happier. I just worry that that kind of fight can make anxiety more problematic for us. There are resources. I mean, we are drowning in information, but starved of knowledge. So speak to your GP or nurse, always helpful. College welfare, peer supporters, they're out there, they're fabulous, all right? Counselling services, of course, there's workshops, and there's a list of resources, COVID specific, some of them, but there's also, yeah, these are all COVID specific, so I just plonk them on there, but you can have the slides and then click on them to your heart's content. So final patronizing picture. You can see I spend most of my time Googling random pictures, but don't limit yourself to panicking at the disco. Panic everywhere, follow your wildest, most anxious dreams. Isn't that sweet? Put that on a t-shirt. Well, looks like someone already has. So there you go. We're going to now break into breakout groups, and breakdancing is optional. So I want you to think of 3 questions. Don't get anxious about them, but just have them there if you want to. What has anxiety stopped you from doing? What excuses does your mind make or say to stop you doing something you really want to do but might be new? And how have you done things that scared you? What helped get you through? These are 3 really interesting questions. And Rebecca really is the Zoom whisperer, is now going to make her magic work by putting us into breakout rooms, I think, I hope. Rebecca, do come to my aid.
Tim, I am. I'm just going to take a photo of your questions so that I can then also broadcast them to the room.
Absolutely, I will pose well.
Yeah, okay, taking
You
a
can see
photo.
I'm worried about how I look, so already I've got a bit of social anxiety right there.
And I'll also stop the recording now, but first, just a huge thank you to you, Tim. That was really wonderful, and I'm sure that everyone who's on this call will have got so much from your talk, so thank you.